and this probably isn't going to be the Esther that you remember from VBS. So we definitely kind of water this story down a lot. So anyway, Esther was a captivity book, and it's a weird book, and it's weird for a lot of reasons, and sometimes I kind of wonder why it's even in the Bible at all, but it is. So it's in the Hebrew canon. It's one book of the Old Testament that does not contain the name of God anywhere in it. So it's implied, of course. We understand the implication, but God's name is never written in the book of Esther. She is a cousin of Mordecai. Y'all probably know that. Mordecai was a Jew, and that's going to get a little interesting too. They were Jews of the captivity, but they were also Jews of, this is the Persian Empire now. We're through Babylon. We're through the Babylonian captivity. We're in the days of the Medes and the Persians. Very powerful empire, very powerful kings. Biggest empire in the world up to that point was the Persian Empire. They were, it was a vast distance. It took about 3 to 4 months for like a proclamation. There'll be a proclamation go out. It takes 3 to 4 months for that proclamation to go into the whole kingdom. That's how big this kingdom is. Xerxes, the king of Esther, is the king who fought the Greeks, overtook that in about 490, 487 something BC, 485 to 487, something like that, fought the Greeks. That happened in the middle of this book, actually. That campaign's in the middle of this book. Sometimes we don't realize the time scope of Esther. We think it's fairly quick. It's not. From the time Vashti, the queen, is disposed by King Xerxes to the time that Esther is made queen is over 4 years. And in that amount of time, that's when the campaign against Greece occurred. So that was going on in the middle of all this book of Esther. These were Jews who could go home, you know, and I think that's really important in this book. You know, the Medes didn't make them stay there. They weren't in captivity. They were there of their own choice. They could have went back to Jerusalem. They could have went back to Judea. There was nothing to keep them there. They were free to go under the Medes. They didn't keep them there like the Babylonians did. They could have left. The Jews could have left. The Jews could have went back to Judah, could have went back to that area of the world. They chose not to do that. They were there of their own free will. Sometimes we don't realize that in this book. We think they're there and they're stuck. They're not. They were as free as you as I to move someplace different. They could have left. So there's a lot in this book, a lot going on in this book. I think it's a difficult book in a lot of ways. And it's a book of oppression. It's a book that kind of demonstrates the oppressiveness of that society against women. And we'll see a lot of that. And when you look at that through your adult eyes instead of your VBS eyes, as you know, 10 and 12 and 13-year-old children, it's a little different book than you see. You know, and it's a very popular children's story. I know that. Esther's a really popular children's story. A lot of VBSs are based on Esther. But it's really kind of a dark, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a dark book. So anyway, we'll look at that a little bit as we go through some of these things. This was in Susa. And the king didn't always stay in Susa, but he had a citadel there. Kind of a bad picture, but you can see the remains of that in the bottom right corner. This is in the middle of the Persian Empire. This isn't Assyria. This isn't Nineveh. Nineveh's up to the west of this, but this is Susa. That's where this is. The Persian Empire encompassed. That's the citadel at Susa. So that's where this, or the ruins, or whatever that is now, but kind of that's that area where this occurred. This book occurred. Real book, real place. This is in 490 BC. This is about the days of Esther. A little bit before that, maybe. I think the campaign against the Greeks was 485 to 487. So a little bit before that. But this is the kind of the extent of the Persian Empire. It's huge. what we call India. It's the valley of the Indus River, way up here, that they had. Basically, this area here, India, the Indus River, and then all the way over. Xerxes, this king, is going to fight the battles up here towards Greece, up in this area. Greece up in here, so fighting that way. Egypt had been conquered by the Medes by this point. So this kind of setting up the Roman Empire to an extent. Rome will take all this Mediterranean area, but they will not take they'll take all this Mediterranean area, but Rome really won't take this. Rome really doesn't go here. So Rome will take here up to the west, but this kind of sets it up. Mediterranean. All around the Mediterranean is Rome. So this is kind of where we're at historically. You can see Assyria up here. Remember, we had the Assyrians, had the Babylonians. Of course, by now, Judah's no longer Judah, which is right down in here, but it's no longer a sovereign state, as we know. Ezra and Nehemiah are back there now, working on the wall, working on the temple. All that's going on during this book, same period of time. All this is going on. So a lot of historical things going on here. We have some historians from that area that give us a lot of insight into the Medes. There was Medes or Persian historians. So we have some history outside of the Bible concerning this era of time and what was going on. And this is concerning this big feast that Xerxes is going to give. Associates, the reign from India to Ethiopia, you saw that. 127 provinces, huge empire. Sat on his throne in the citadel in Susa, and that's what we were looking at. In the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes, attendants, army officers, and nobles. This banquet was 180 days. That's a long time, ain't it? That's a big deal. That's half a year, right? 180 days. And this was before a lot of historians think this was leading up to his campaign against the Greeks. This was leading up to this military campaign. Was a lot of what was going on here. This was kind of the precursor to that campaign he was fixing to wage. So he has this a lot of wealth, big empire. The king, when these days were completed, gave a banquet lasting 7 days at the citadel in Susa. It says, from the greatest to the least, the court of the garden, hangings of fine white and violet linen. This gives you an idea of the wealth. That's why this is here. Couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement. Marble, mother of pearl, precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds. The royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. For so the king had given orders to each official's household that he should do according to the desires of each person. That's kind of an interesting statement, and we don't understand that. But and I actually had to study on that. I didn't really understand that either. But apparently, in those days when you were in these big banquets, there was a toastmaster. I always wonder where that came from, Toastmaster. My mother was a member of Toastmasters when I was a child. And there was a Toastmaster. And apparently how you would drink was the Toastmaster would tell you when to drink. That was his job. He was the Toastmaster. So he would tell you when to drink. And but apparently in this licentious affair, right? We don't use that word much, but that kind of describes this. The king said, just let them drink when they want, right? Open bar. We say it was an open bar, right? Let them drink when they want. So the Toastmaster wasn't to tell them when to drink, which gives you an idea of the bounty of the king and the wealth of the king and the occasion of this, how it was very licentious, very open. They were getting a little drunk. You're kind of going to see this coming on. King's going to say some stuff probably shouldn't have said. Things are going here. So this is kind of what's going on. Big party, huge party. Party to end all parties, right? Is what this is. And the king and the women are also having a banquet. Now, according to Median or Persian historians, Women and men weren't necessarily had to do this separately, and most of the time they didn't. So this was a little different, apparently, even in that society, for them to actually be doing this separately anyway. And the queen of Xerxes, Vashti, she is also having this banquet. And on the seventh day, when he was merry with wine, remember this is 7 days of feasting after this 180 days, so it's the very end of it. He commanded, and the reason they put these names in here is to give credibility to the book, 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the prince. She was beautiful, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs, and the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. Now, why didn't she come, right? I mean, king says to come. King's had a little too much to drink, obviously, at this point. The king says to come to show her beauty, to wear her royal crown. Well, there's a couple of thoughts about this. One is that he wanted her to actually come naked, wearing only her royal crown. The other one is that he wanted her to come without being veiled. In other words, to see her beauty. And either way, of course, would have been disgraceful. So even though oftentimes we think Vashti was like just disobedient, she should have just did what the king said to do, the truth was she probably was doing the honorable thing by not coming. But before that, she would get punished. And sometimes we forget that, and I think that's interesting in the story, is that she was probably doing the right thing, the thing, honorable thing, the modest thing, the thing that she should have done, because he obviously was doing something that went against her morality or against her belief. But yet she refused to do it. And instead of just having her killed, which he could have done, because these kings were very bloodthirsty, they were very powerful, and we missed that in the story. Darius, who was a king before Xerxes, Darius was known for just killing people who disagreed with him, just killing them. So he didn't even put up with it. If people disagreed with him, he was known for that. Even his officials in the court, if they disagreed, he would just kill them. So they were very powerful, very, very powerful people. Do what they wanted. Nobody was going to say anything about it. But he's gearing up for this military campaign. He's winning the favor of his princes. He's winning the favor of the people. And so he is angry, of course, because she didn't come. But I think she had a reason not to come. And so he's going to put this like before council, before these close people, and he's going to say, according to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuch. So law is important, even for the king. We'll see that in this. And what he signs with his signet ring, and we all probably saw that in movies where they put the wax and they push their wing into the wax. They push their ring into the wax. To seal it with their seal, and once they do that, it's sealed. And we saw that in the case of Darius with Daniel, where he signed the decree, and Daniel had to be thrown to the lion's den because he couldn't undo it because he had made it official. So you see how binding it was. Once the king made the edict or signed it with a signet ring, he couldn't even take it back. So law is important. Law is very binding. And so he's asking them what to do. And they say, the queen's conduct will become well known. In other words, this is going to be a problem because all the women are going to think they can do whatever they want. You got to understand the oppression of women in this story. It's just almost beyond my comprehension. But women were so oppressed in this story. I mean, this is really a huge story of female oppression. If you want to get right down to it, it's almost beyond my belief. Women were simply property in this case, and that was exactly how he looked at that queen. She was property. She didn't do what he said to do, and something was going to happen, right? You don't see any compassion, mercy, love, understanding. This just really doesn't exist in this book. And so, let's not let her get away with it, because Lord knows if we let her get away with this, look at all them other women will do, right? They're going to do the same thing. So we're gonna squelch this right now, The ladies of Persia who have heard the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes. There will be plenty of contempt and anger. It's just you'll see this as we go through this, and probably more than you've probably ever seen it, unless you really studied this book. You're going to see how oppressive this is to women in this book. It's almost, like I said, it's almost unbelievable, essentially. It says, so let's go find another one, right? A royal position, another who is more worthy than she. And it appears to me she was really worthy of it, because she's the one, the way I read this, that stood up for her beliefs in spite of the fact it was probably going to cost her, could have even cost her life. I mean, she knew what it meant to tell the king no. I mean, she didn't take that. That wasn't a light. That wasn't, oh, well, this time I'm not going to do it. Right? I mean, that wasn't a light thing. It was a big thing. She knew the consequences, and she chose that anyway, so there was a reason. So, but let's find someone more worthy. So let's go steal all these girls from their families. I mean, basically where we're at, right? I mean, we don't talk about this much when we do the little kids deals, but that's really what was going on here. Let's go find a bunch of virgins and round up all the pretty ones, and let's bring them to the palace, right? So they go out, and most of these girls, we know historically, they didn't go willingly. This wasn't something you really wanted, because basically it confined you to widowhood for the rest of your life. And this wasn't desirable, because many were taken, few were chosen. They kept them in these huge harems that more than one man could possibly take care of, for sure. And they may see the king maybe once, in the entire time they were in this harem, and that would be it. The rest of their life would be spent sequestered by a bunch of eunuchs in this harem. They would never have children. They would never be married. They were destined to widowhood. So it was this wasn't desirable. This wasn't something this wasn't a beauty contest. Girls didn't line up to say, oh, choose me, please choose me. It wasn't anything like that. This was not a desirable thing to do. So it was pretty ruthless, actually. They went in, they took these girls, took these women, and brought them to the citadel. And this was a lengthy deal. From the time Vashti is actually dethroned until the time that Esther actually becomes queen is 4 years. So that's a lot. That's a long time for these women to be held up, basically, in this harem. You know, that's what it is. It's a harem. So that's basically the situation of this book. That's what's going on here. It says, let's do it. Let's make them honor their husbands, great and small. So they went into the countryside, and they so they went to the countryside, so they issued an edict into all their languages to go into all these provinces and find these find these girls, women. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, remember Vashti, what she had done, and what he had decreed against her. And the king's. So I think this is thrown in here because I think at some point, Xerxes, he figured out that what he'd done wasn't the right thing. He remembered her, is really what that means. He remembered her. But he had already done it, and he couldn't take back the edict. So it was already done. And I think that gives credibility to the fact that Vashti probably did the right thing. And he probably was drunk and asked her to do something that he never should have asked her to do. So I think he comes to his senses, basically, is what this is saying. He kind of comes to his senses, but by this time, guess what? Too late. He's already done it. So we're going to go find you a new one, right? We're going to go find you a new one. So the king's attendants, of beautiful and virgins, besought for the king, let the king appoint overseers. They may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, and to the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the woman, and let their cosmetics be given them. So he's going to gather them all up, lock them up, put a bunch of eunuchs over them so they can't get out, and they're going to try to make them beautiful for a year. Basically is what's going to happen. They're going to give them their cosmetics. They're going to feed them. Interestingly, in this case, we'll get into that. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Let the young lady who pleased the king be queen in place of Vashti, and the matter pleased the king. He did accordingly. A Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile with captives who had been exiled. We know about Mordecai. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had exiled. We're not under Nebuchadnezzar anymore. Like I said, they're free to go home. He's choosing not to do it. He was bringing up in Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. Esther's her Persian name, not her Hebrew name. That's why there's two names here, like Daniel, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's a Hebrew and a Hebrew name and a Persian name. So her Persian name's Esther, his uncle's daughter. So she's his cousin. She had no father or mother. Y'all probably know this part of the story pretty well. Beautiful of form and face. Mordecai took her his own daughter. Came about when the command. Many young ladies were gathered into the custody. Esther was taken to the king's palace. And the young lady pleased him, found favor with him. This could have been as many as 1,300 women. Yeah, this isn't, the low side's like 430. Depends on how you read this text. But on the high side, it's like 1,360 women. That's a lot of women, right? I mean, this is a huge harem. This is huge. We don't realize the scope, magnitude of what's going on here. This is forced servitude. This is not a great thing. Just throwing that out there, right? This isn't a great thing for your daughter to be carried off to a harem. So anyway, any comments? Nobody's had any comments. Nobody's challenged me on a single thing this morning. So he takes them. The young lady pleased him, found favor with him, with the eunuch, so he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food. We don't see her refusing the food of the Persians, saying it's not clean, as Daniel did with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Mordecai told her not to reveal that she was a Jew, and I guess maybe that was part of that deception. But interestingly, she didn't observe the law. If she would have, she wouldn't have ate probably most of that food that was placed before her. Daniel with the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he said, don't let them eat that. I'm going to, let them eat what I'm going to give them. I don't see that in this story. She kind of gave in to it, or maybe that was part of the ruse. But nevertheless, went against the law. Transferred to the best place in the harem, so I assume there's good places and bad places in a harem. I really don't understand that concept, but maybe closer to the front of the line. I don't know how that works for sure. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her. I guess that's part of the ruse, Every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. You get an idea of how they're sequestered in this, right? They're not allowed to come out. They're basically held prisoner in here. A bunch of eunuchs watch them. We know why that is, right? These guys were made eunuchs for a reason. So a bunch of eunuchs watched them, and they were kind of held prisoner in here. I mean, I'm sure they were fed well and given what they needed, but nevertheless, it was kind of a weird situation. For 12 months, under the regulations for women. Don't understand why that is the case, but I guess to make sure they're virgins, for one thing, to make sure that they're pure, to make sure, I don't know. 6 months with oil and myrrh, 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. So basically, these women get made beautiful for a year. So a year passes in this harem where all these women are just made beautiful, I guess, to the best of their ability, right? So this is a year. A year goes on here. It took at least 4 months for the decree to go out to tell them all to come. That's at least 4 months. I've studied on that a little bit because Carla gave me that question, how long? About 4 months to go throughout that empire. By the fastest way, it was 3 to 4 months to get from Susa to the end of the empire and back was 3 to 4 months. So this didn't happen fast, This is time. Then they had to gather them up. Then they had to haul them all up there. Then it was 12 months there before this process even started. So this is a long period of time that we're talking about here. So it says the young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything she desired was given her to take with from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening would go in the morning she would return to the second harem, which I assume would be the one after they'd been to the king. The king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. So at this point, they're concubines. So we know about that from the Old Testament, right? They're just women for the king's pleasure. They're not wives. They don't have wife status. They're just concubines, right? We know the difference in that from the Jews, from the Jewish, from David and Solomon, who all had concubines and wives. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. So basically, it was a one-shot deal, and unless the king liked her or called her back, from then on, she just lived in that harem for the rest of her life. So I'm telling you, this is kind of a dark book. A lot of this kind of a dark story, you know. So it was pretty bleak, right? When the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her daughter, came in to go into the king, she did not request anything. She relied upon the eunuch to tell her what to bring because she figured that the eunuch knew. Esther found favor to all who find her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, in the 7th year of his reign. Okay, so figure this up with me for a minute. So this is going on. This is the 7th year of his reign. Started in the 2nd year of his reign, right, or 3rd year. So we're up like 4 years now. So he basically had a woman basically going into him every night for quite a while here, right? So depending on how you take this period of time, this span of time, that's a whole lot of women, right? So this is a big, big thing. He loved Esther more than all the women. She found favor with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So there's probably more went on in here than what we know, book recorded, but basically it's interesting to me in this book that at no point up to this time has God ever been mentioned. His favor, never been revealed. Was it God who made Vashti favorable to the king? Text never says that, right? God's not mentioned in this story. So it kind of sets it up a little bit. So any comments so far in the book of Esther? Maybe starting to see Esther with a little bit different light than Esther before. You know, it's funny, we go back on these stories, these kids' stories, isn't it? We've heard all our lives, and we go back and look at them through adult eyes, and the story's still there. And granted, there's a lot of great truths in Esther and a lot of great things about Esther, but you kind of see the bigger picture of kind of how cruel this was and how dark this was in a lot of ways. So Esther becomes queen. King gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and servants, made a holiday, gave gifts. Virgins were gathered together for the second time. And I really don't understand that whole, and I've tried to study that to see what that meant, and I couldn't get anything good. I really don't know what that means. Virgins were gathered together for the second time. I would assume those were all the virgins that were gathered together for the first time. They were gathered together for the second time for this. I don't know. Mordecai was at the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai commanded her. For Esther, Mordecai told her. So basically, she says, I'm not going to let you know that I'm a Jew, my lineage. I don't know how they kept that secret for sure, but apparently they did. So anyway, Mordecai apparently he has a little bit of influence. Mordecai is at the gate all the time. Gates where things happen in these days. Gates where proclamations are made. Gates are big. The big gate to the city. That's where edicts are issued. Proclamations are made. If you remember, Eli, when he fell over, was sitting at the gate, right? If you ever read the book of Ruth, Boaz had to go to the gate to claim Ruth. Remember that? So these things were made at the gate. That's where these decisions were made, at the gate. So that was an important place. That's why Mordecai had some authority there, had some position there. He was there. And he heard of a plot that two of these guys were going to kill the king. The plot became known to Mordecai. He told Queen Esther. Esther informed the king. When the plot was investigated, found to be so, they were both hanged on a gallows. It was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So they put this little tidbit in here, this little piece, because they want you to know that this is giving Esther some credibility with the king. She had thwarted the plot. Mordecai had helped her to thwart the plot. Still no mention of God here. This wasn't a God thing, I guess. I don't know. No mention of God in this. One of those things that happened. He thwarted the plot, gave Esther some credibility with the king, helped her standing. That's the reason this is put in there. And she's going to have a little more. And still, she's not, I think that relationship is still king-queen relationship's a little bit different in this society. She's still a little bit scared of him. And then we're introduced to Haman, Agagite, Assyrian, basically. Maybe why Mordecai won't bow down. Advanced him, established authority. So Haman becomes the second command. And the king's servants bowed down, paid homage to Haman. For so the king commanded. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. I don't really understand in this story. Never quite understood. Wish we had that. Did Mordecai bow down to the king? I would assume that he did, because I think if he hadn't, I think there would have been consequences. Have you ever read the story with Darius and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they wouldn't bow down to the image? You were kind of required to pay homage to the king, and Jews did do that, even though. Yeah, apparently. Hmm. I guess. I think part of it was because Haman was a Syrian, and I think I think that was part of it too. Probably was that he. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It kind of gives you some scope. More, Haman really didn't even notice it. Actually, if you read this, uh, the king's servants heard the king's bait. Why are you transgressing the king's command? So it was the command of the king, not of Haman, to bow. And they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed nor paid homage, Haman was filled with rage. So apparently Haman really didn't know it. Gives you an idea of probably how many people were out there. He just didn't pay attention until it was brought to his attention. When it was brought to his attention, he saw that Mordecai didn't bow down. He was filled with rage. Rage to the point that he's going to commit genocide. That's pretty mad, right? So this is a genocide. This is a Holocaust event, more or less, I guess you could say. It's going to be genocide against the Jews. Learn that he was a Jew, so he's going to do genocide against the Jews, which this is very difficult to understand in a lot of ways, and how this could have even been done would have been hard to understand, I think, but it is the story, it is the text. Throughout the whole kingdom, that would have been Judea, right? The whole kingdom, Judea, Jerusalem, is all part of that kingdom. So if this edict was to stand, that would have been all the Jews everywhere, if that could have been done, and that would have included Jerusalem. That would have included Judea, because that was part of this kingdom. It wasn't just the city. It wasn't just Susa. It was the whole place, the whole kingdom. So there's a lot of scholarly debate about that, of course. In the first month, in the 12th year, so we're up to the 12th year of King Assyrius now, a lot was cast from Haman to decide when was the best time for him to approach the king and to give him this thing. So he's trying to pour the favor of the gods, right? It's casting lots to decide when's the best time to go to the king and say, I've got this idea. So he's trying to do this in the right time. So he's casting lots to figure out when that's going to be. So then the 12th month, he goes before the king, and he says, there's certain people scattered, dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different. They do not observe the king's laws, so it is not the king's interest to let them remain. Kind of the same thing we saw with Nehemiah or Ezra when they went back and said, these people are rebellious and you need to get rid of them. It's kind of the same thing. These people are bad news. They have a different law, which is true. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Now, that's kind of a confusing statement. But basically, what it means is this. We're going to kill them. We're going to take what they have. It's going to cost you some money, but you're going to get back way more than it cost you, because we're going to take all their wealth and we're going to return it back to you. Sounds very reminiscent of Hitler, doesn't it? So it's genocide. We're going to commit genocide. We're going to take their stuff. The king took a signet ring, gave it to Haman. We all talked about that, his authority. The enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the silver is yours and the people also, to do with them as you please. Basically, the king's just giving it all to Haman. This is really working out good for him, right? This is really playing out how he wants it to play out. He's not only going to kill all the Jews, he's going to be really, really wealthy at the end of the thing. So it's worked out for Haman. Haman's got it going on. It's all working in Haman's favor. The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. It is written, Haman commanded, writing in their own language. It's always brought up. King of Syria sealed it with a signet ring. Letters were sent to all the king's provinces. This takes about 4 months for this to go out. To seize their possessions as plunder. So basically, he sends out this edict to kill all the Jews and all of Persia. You see how big Persia was, right? This would have been Jerusalem, Judea. This would have been all the places the Jews were, all these cities they'd scattered out and lived. This would have been all those places they were. And the decree goes out to kill all of them, all the Jews, genocide, mass genocide, and to take all their stuff. And the king's okay with it. King's like, whatever. You want to kill 10 million, 30 million, 40 million Jews, whatever it is, and take their stuff? Go ahead. You're going to be a rich man. It's all good with me. Gives you an idea how bloodthirsty, how cruel this was, of a situation this was. Are you starting to kind of see why I'm saying Esther in a lot of ways is kind of a dark book? There's a lot of stuff going on here. So he does, sends out the decree. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published in all the peoples. They should be ready for this day. So the day is set that you're going to kill all the Jews. And at this point now, they can't go anywhere, because guess what? Every place they can go is in this empire. So they're stuck. At this point, they're stuck. Right? So if Mordecai would have just went home at the beginning of this would have never been an issue. That's how I see it. Right? But since Mordecai decided not to go home, not to go back to Jerusalem, guess what? We have a problem now. Right? So this went out, and the couriers went out. The king commanded, a decree was issued in the citadel in Susa while the king and Haman sat down to drink. The city of Susa was in confusion. I thought that's a very interesting line in the text. They were not at all concerned. Am I right? Because they were sitting down to drink. They were not at all concerned, and the city of Susa was in confusion because the edict had went out that on a certain day all the Jews would be killed and their possessions would all be taken. And that is where we end this morning's lesson. Thanks for your time this morning.